Hello, story lovers. Tonight, we're diving into a tale of passion, secrets, and choices that could change everything. Hearts will be broken, love will be tested, and every twist will leave you on the edge of your seat. Comment below where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, hit like, subscribe. Share it with someone who loves a powerful love story. And tap the bell so you never miss the next thrilling chapter. Ready? Let's begin. Asterisk, the crystal chandelier cast fractured rainbows across. Victoria Hayes borrowed black dress as she adjusted her camera strap for the third time. The Plaza Hotel's ballroom buzzed with New York's elite, their laughter sharp as champagne bubbles against marble floors. She didn't belong here, and everyone would know it if they looked too closely. "Stop fidgeting," whispered Marcus Rivera, her friend from journalism school who'd somehow scored press passes. "Act like you own the place," Victoria nodded, raising her camera to capture the choreographed perfection of high society charity work. Through her lens, she spotted him immediately. James Whitmore stood near the far wall, phone pressed to his ear, his presence commanding attention, even in silence. At 34, he was New York's most ruthless CEO. He's built like he could break someone in half, but dressed like he'd rather buy their company and fire them instead. His gray eyes were winter storms, and when he ended his call, Victoria felt their weight across the room. That's when the cruelty started. "Look at that pathetic girl," sneered a blonde socialite dripping in diamonds, her voice carrying toward a young waitress who'd spilled champagne. Someone clearly doesn't understand basic etiquette. The 19-year-old server frantically dabbed at the spill, her face burning with shame. Victoria's chest tightened. She knew that humiliation had worn it like a second skin throughout her scholarship years at private school. "Maybe she's never seen real crystal before," another woman added, their laughter cutting through the ballroom's warmth. Victoria lowered her camera and stepped forward. "Excuse me? But I think you're confusing charity with cruelty." The blonde's eyes narrowed as she sized up. "Victoria's borrowed dress. I'm sorry, but who exactly are you? Someone who doesn't need to humiliate working people to feel important." Victoria moved protectively beside the waitress, whose hands were still shaking. "How dare you?" The socialite's voice rose, drawing stares. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" "Someone who desperately needs a better hobby." Victoria helped steady the girl's tray. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's find people who deserve your service." But the blonde wasn't finished. "Typical. I bet you don't even have a real invitation. Security should remove people like you." Victoria's blood turned to fire. She'd heard those words before, felt that dismissal slice through her confidence too many times. Slowly, she turned back to face the group. "You know what? You're absolutely right. I don't belong in your world of fake smiles and manufactured kindness. But at least I have something your money will never buy." "And what would that be?" the blonde demanded. "A soul." The woman's face flushed crimson. "You have no idea who I am. My husband will destroy your little photography career before it even starts." That's when Victoria felt him behind her, a presence that made the air thicken. Is there a problem here? She turned and found herself staring into those winter storm eyes. James Whitmore stood close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something more dangerous. Up close, he was devastating. Tall, perfectly controlled, and absolutely terrifying. The blonde socialite's anger melted into nervous charm. "James, darling, there's no problem at all." "Charming as always," he replied. But his voice could have frozen the champagne fountain. Victoria looked at him, then at the women who suddenly seemed eager to disappear. Something wild and reckless stirred in her chest. She was tired of being dismissed, tired of watching cruel people win, tired of playing it safe. "You know what?" she said loud enough for half the ballroom to hear. "I don't need to defend myself to people like this." Before she could think, before she could consider consequences or cameras or career suicide, Victoria Hayes grabbed James Whitmore by the lapels of his perfectly tailored jacket and kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was firm, determined, desperate. 5 seconds of absolute madness that made the entire ballroom fall silent. 5 seconds where she felt his surprise melt into something that might have been hunger. When she pulled away, James stared at her with his composure completely shattered. His lips were slightly parted, his controlled mask cracked wide open. "Thanks for the backup," Victoria whispered, her hand still pressed against his chest. "Sometimes you need to make a statement." She released him and walked toward the elevator as if she owned the world, leaving behind a ballroom full of shocked faces and a billionaire who, for the first time in years, didn't know what to say. But as the elevator doors closed, Victoria caught a glimpse of something in James' eyes that made her stomach drop. It wasn't just surprise or attraction. It was recognition. Victoria's reflection in the elevator's polished doors looked like a stranger. Smudged lipstick, wild hair, borrowed dress wrinkled from gripping a billionaire's jacket. But her lips still burned from the kiss, and something fierce and alive coursed through her veins. Marcus caught up with her in the lobby, breathless and pale. "Vic, have you completely lost your mind?" "Probably," she replied, pushing through the hotel's revolving doors into the cool night air. But it felt incredible. "Do you know who you just kissed?" Marcus fumbled with his phone, his reporter instincts kicking in even through his panic. That was James Whitmore. The James Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries, the most powerful and untouchable man in New York. Victoria's steps faltered on the sidewalk. "And worse," Marcus continued, showing her his phone screen where notifications exploded like fireworks. "There are already 6 different videos of your kiss trending on social media. You just went viral, kissing the most ruthless billionaire in America." Victoria stared at the screen, watching herself grab James Whitmore and kiss him from 5 different angles. The comments were already flooding in. Some called her brave. Others called her insane. All of them wanted to know who she was. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. "Don't answer that," Marcus warned. But Victoria was already sliding to accept. Victoria Hayes. The voice was smooth, controlled. It's that slight British accent that spoke of expensive boarding schools. "We need to talk." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "How did you get this number?" "I get everything I want, Miss Hayes. The question is what you want. I want you to leave me alone." But even as she said it, Victoria felt drawn to the danger in his voice. "I'm afraid that's no longer possible. You've made us both very public figures tonight. Meet me tomorrow. 1 p.m., the Penthouse restaurant at the Carlyle. I'm not meeting you anywhere, then I'll come to you. 47 Bleecker Street, apartment for B. Your choice." The line went dead. Victoria stared at her phone, ice spreading through her veins. He knew where she lived. "What did he want?" Marcus asked. "To control the narrative," Victoria whispered. But she suspected it was much more than that. Across town, James Whitmore stood at the floor-tussling windows of his corner office, the city sprawling beneath him like a game board. His lips still tingled from Victoria's kiss. And that fact infuriated him more than the viral videos or the emergency board meeting he'd have to face tomorrow. Sir Benjamin Cross, his assistant, hovered near the door with a tablet full of crisis management protocols. "The PR team is waiting for your decision. Tell them to wait." James touched his lips unconsciously, remembering the feel of Victoria's hands on his chest, the desperate courage in her kiss. "What did you find on her?" "Victoria Hayes, 26, freelance photographer from Brooklyn. Scholarship student at Whitmore Academy from ages 14 to 18. James went very still. "What did you say?" "She attended Whitmore Academy. Your father's school. She would have been there when you gave that commencement speech in 2018. The memories hit James like physical blows. Whitmore Academy. His father's pride and joy. The place where everything went wrong. "Sir, are you all right?" James gripped the window frame. Victoria Hayes hadn't just kissed a stranger tonight. She'd kissed the man whose family had destroyed her scholarship. His father had expelled her best friend for being unsuitable for the Whitmore Academy image. She'd kissed the enemy, and she probably didn't even know it yet. "Cancel all my meetings tomorrow except one," James said quietly. "And Benjamin? Make sure Miss Hayes receives flowers first thing in the morning. White roses. No card, sir, is that wise? Given the circumstances?" James turned from the window, his gray eyes cold as Arctic wind. "She started this game when she kissed me in front of 500 people. Now, we finish it. But as Benjamin left to carry out his orders, James stared at his reflection in the darkened window and wondered who would be destroyed when the game was over. Because Victoria Hayes wasn't just some photographer who'd gotten caught up in a moment of rebellion. She was the girl whose life his family had shattered 7 years ago. And tomorrow, he'd have to decide whether to tell her the truth or let her walk into his trap blind. Victoria stared at the white roses covering her kitchen table, their perfection unsettling in her cramped Brooklyn apartment. No card, but she knew who'd sent them. The same man who'd somehow gotten her address, her phone number, and probably her entire life story by now. Her laptop screen showed the damage. The kiss video had exploded overnight. Hashtag Who is Victoria Hayes was trending worldwide. Her anonymous photography Instagram had gained 50,000 followers. 3 news stations had called before 7 a.m. The knock on her door came at exactly 1 p.m. Victoria opened it to find James Whitmore standing in her hallway, looking impossibly out of place in his $1,000 suit. Up close, in daylight, he was even more devastating than she remembered. "You didn't come to the Carlisle?" he said. "I don't take orders from strangers." "We're not strangers anymore, Victoria." Not after last night. Something in the way he said her name made her step back. He followed her inside, his presence filling her small apartment like smoke. "Nice place," he said, though his eyes held no judgment, only careful assessment. "Reminds me of my first apartment in London." "Somehow I doubt that." Victoria crossed her arms, trying to ignore how the afternoon light caught the silver threads in his dark hair. "What do you want, Mr. Whitmore?" "James, and I want to know why you kissed me, I told you. I was making a statement." "About what?" "Social justice. Standing up to bullies?" He moved closer, and Victoria caught that dangerous scent again. Or was it something else? "Like what?" James studied her face with an intensity that made her skin burn. "Like recognition." Victoria's heart skipped. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Whitmore Academy, 2015 to 2018, full scholarship. Photography club president. Graduated valedictorian despite leaving 3 months early." The blood drained from Victoria's face. "How did you?" "I know everything about you, Victoria Hayes, including why you really left." The memories crashed over her like ice water. Her best friend? Emma's expulsion for moral violations that were really just being poor and not fitting the Whitmore Academy image. The scholarship review that stripped away her funding for associating with undesirable elements. The humiliation of packing her dorm room while her wealthy classmates whispered. "You don't know anything," Victoria whispered. "I know my father destroyed your scholarship because you defended your friend. I know you had to finish senior year at a public school in Brooklyn. I know you've been photographing the elite ever since, documenting their cruelty. Stop. I know you've been hunting us, Victoria. And last night, you found your target." Victoria's hands trembled with rage and something else. Something that felt like grief. "Your father was a monster who crushed kids like me for sport." "Yes," James said simply. "He was." The admission hit Victoria like a slap. She'd expected denials, justifications, corporate speak, not this raw honesty that made her anger falter. "He ruined my life," she whispered. "He ruined mine too." Victoria looked up sharply. James' controlled mask had slipped, revealing something broken underneath. "My father built Whitmore Academy to create perfect little soldiers for his empire. When I graduated from Cambridge and refused to play his games, he cut me off completely. Told me I could have his company when I proved I was ruthless enough to deserve it. So you became ruthless. I became him." James' jaw tightened. "The man who destroyed your scholarship, who expelled your friend, who turned elite education into a weapon? I inherited all of that when he died 2 years ago." Victoria felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know who you kissed last night." James stepped closer, and Victoria could see the pain he kept buried behind those winter eyes. "You kissed the man who owns the system that destroyed your life. Get out." Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. "Victoria, get out?" James didn't move. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. Before I go, your friend Emma Martinez. She's working 3 jobs in Queens to pay for community college. This is a full scholarship to NYU's journalism program, plus a living stipend. Victoria stared at the envelope like it might explode. What's the catch? No catch. Consider it payment for a debt my family owed. I don't want your guilt money. It's not guilt money. James set the envelope on her counter next to the white roses. It's war reparations. He moved toward the door, then turned back. The kiss last night? It wasn't random, Victoria. You've been photographing charity events for 3 years, documenting how people like my family operate. You were hunting me long before you knew who I was. Victoria's throat closed. He was right, and they both knew it. The question is, James continued, his hand on the doorknob, what happens now that you've caught me? He left her standing in her apartment, surrounded by white roses and the ruins of everything she thought she knew. Because Victoria Hayes had spent 7 years hating James Whitmore's family. But the man who just walked out of her apartment wasn't the monster she'd expected. He was something far more dangerous. He was human. 3 weeks later, Victoria stood in James' penthouse office as the sun set over Manhattan, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. The scholarship envelope for Emma sat on his desk between them, still unopened, still representing everything complicated about what they'd become. You haven't given it to her yet? James observed, loosening his tie. The gesture was becoming familiar. This small surrender of control that only happened when they were alone. I haven't decided if I trust you yet, Victoria replied, though the lie tasted bitter. She trusted him enough to be here, in his private space, sharing takeout Chinese food while he worked late. Trusted him enough to let him see her photographs, to listen when he talked about the weight of inheriting his father's legacy. Trusted him enough to let him kiss her goodnight 3 days. Go, smart woman. James moved to the windows, and Victoria watched his reflection in the glass. Trust is expensive in my world. What world is that exactly? The one where every conversation is recorded, every relationship is leverage, every kiss at a charity gala becomes a weapon. Victoria joined him at the window, close enough to feel his warmth. Is that what I was? A weapon? James turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his gray eyes made her chest ache. You were supposed to be. Before she could ask what he meant, his phone buzzed. James glanced at the screen and his face went carefully blank. I have to take this. He stepped away. But Victoria caught the name on the caller ID. Benjamin Cross, his assistant who'd been avoiding eye contact all week. This is Whitmore. James. Voice shifted into corporate mode. Yes, I understand. No, proceed as planned. Something cold twisted in Victoria's stomach. She watched James' reflection in the window, saw the way his shoulders tensed, the way his free hand curled into a fist, the photographs from the gallery opening. Yes, she was there. No, she doesn't know. Victoria's blood turned to ice. The gallery opening. Last weekend, when James had insisted on taking her to see an emerging artist he wanted to support, when he'd held her hand and whispered commentary about pretentious art critics, making her laugh despite herself, when she'd felt like maybe, just maybe, she could trust the man who'd inherited her enemy's empire. The story runs tomorrow morning, James continued, his back still to Victoria. Full spread. Yes, I know what it means for her. Victoria's photographer instincts kicked in. She pulled out her phone and started recording. Her hands steady, despite the earthquake happening in her chest. She'll never forgive me. But that was always the plan. James' reflection showed no emotion. Victoria Hayes destroyed my reputation with that kiss. Now, I destroy hers. The words hit Victoria like physical blows. She kept recording as James continued. The photographs of her with Marcus Rivera at the gallery will suggest an affair. The financial records showing payments to her account will imply she's been selling celebrity photos to tabloids. And the story about her scholarship expulsion will paint her as a social climber who seduces wealthy men for access. Victoria's vision blurred. The payments to her account? The legitimate freelance work he'd arranged, claiming he wanted to support her photography. It had all been set up. By tomorrow afternoon, Victoria Hayes will be persona non grata in every elite circle in New York. Her photography career will be over. Her reputation destroyed. And she'll disappear back to Brooklyn where she'll belongs. Victoria stopped recording and slipped her phone into her pocket, her hands shaking with rage and betrayal. The kiss was just the beginning, James said into the phone. This is how we finish it. He ended the call and turned around, his expression shifting back to the careful warmth she'd started to believe was real. But Victoria had seen behind the mask now. Sorry about that, he said, moving toward her. Where were we? We were finishing, Victoria replied, her voice steady as granite. James stopped walking. What? I said we were finishing. Victoria picked up the scholarship envelope and tore it in half. The way you always planned? Understanding dawned in James' eyes, followed by something that might have been panic. Victoria, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. She dropped the torn envelope on his desk. The kiss at the gala was my mistake. Everything since then has been your revenge. That's not. James reached for her, but Victoria stepped back. Don't touch me. Her voice could have. We're frozen the champagne fountain at the plaza. Don't you ever touch me again. She walked toward the elevator, each step measured and controlled despite the chaos in her chest. Victoria, wait. Let me explain. She turned back one last time. James stood in the middle of his empire, surrounded by the tools of his revenge, looking more broken than she'd ever seen him. You want to know the difference between you and your father? Victoria asked. He destroyed people because he was cruel. You destroy them because you're a coward. The elevator doors closed on James Whitmore's shattered expression, but as Victoria descended toward the lobby, she pressed play on the recording in her phone because Victoria Hayes had learned something important about war in the past 3 weeks. The best revenge was always served with evidence, and tomorrow morning, the world would learn exactly who James Whitmore really was. The recording went live at 6 a.m., simultaneously across every major platform. Victoria had spent the night editing, creating a devastating expose that paired James' confession with the evidence she'd been gathering for 3 years. Photos of Whitmore Academy's unsuitable students being expelled. Financial records showing the systematic destruction of scholarship programs. James' own voice admitting to orchestrating her ruin. By 8 a.m., Whitmore Industries stock had dropped 15%. By noon, 3 board members had called for James' resignation. By 3 p.m., Victoria's phone was buzzing with interview requests from 60 different news outlets. She ignored them all and sat in Prospect Park feeding pigeons and waiting. I figured I'd find you here. Victoria didn't look up as James sat beside her on the bench. He looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. His perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his gray eyes held the hollow exhaustion of a man watching his empire crumble. How did you know where to find me? She asked. You photographed this park in your scholarship portfolio? 7 years ago, James scattered breadcrumbs for the pigeons, his movements careful and controlled. It was the piece that convinced my father you were too dangerous to keep around, because I showed the truth about his perfect world. Because you showed beauty in places he couldn't monetize. James turned to look at her. Victoria saw something she'd never expected in those winter eyes. Respect. He was afraid of you, Victoria. That's why he destroyed your scholarship, and you. What's your excuse? James was quiet for a long moment. I was afraid too, but not of you. Of this, he gestured between them, of caring about someone who could see through everything I'd built. Victoria finally looked at him. So you decided to destroy me instead. I decided to destroy you before you could destroy me, James. The voice was raw with honesty. But you were already under my skin, Victoria. Every conversation, every laugh, every moment you looked at me like I might actually be human instead of a monster. I was falling apart, and the plan was the only thing keeping me. Together, the plan to ruin my life. The plan to protect myself from feeling something real for the first time since I was 18 years old. Victoria felt the familiar ache in her chest, the one that had started the night he'd kissed her back at the plaza. Why are you telling me this now? Your career is over. Your reputation is destroyed. What's left to protect? James pulled out an envelope, this one sealed with the Whitmore Industries logo. Full scholarships for every student who is expelled from Whitmore Academy for being unsuitable. Endowment funds to make sure it never happens again. In this, he handed her a second envelope. Victoria opened it and found ownership papers. Whitmore Academy is yours now, James said quietly, to run however you see fit, to make it the place it was supposed to be. Victoria stared at the documents, her hands trembling. This is worth millions. It's worth more than that. It's worth redemption. For who? For everyone we both failed. James stood up, brushing breadcrumbs from his suit. Your friend Emma starts at NYU next semester, by the way. Full ride, no strings attached. She thinks it's a minority scholarship program. Victoria looked up at him. This man who'd been her enemy and her downfall, and somehow, impossibly, her salvation. What happens to you now? James smiled, and for the first time since she'd known him, it reached his eyes. I go back to London. Start over. Maybe remember who I was before I became my father. Just like that? Just like that. He started to walk away, then turned back. Victoria? Yeah. The kiss at the plaza. That wasn't planned. That wasn't strategy, or revenge, or any of it. His voice was soft, almost lost in the park's afternoon sounds. That was just you being the bravest person I'd ever met. In the 3 weeks after, James was quiet for so long Victoria thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was barely a whisper. Those were the 3 weeks I remembered what it felt like to be human. He walked away then, disappearing into the crowd of afternoon joggers and dog walkers. Victoria sat on the bench until the sun set, holding the deeds to her former school and watching the city light up like a constellation. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Emma got the NYU acceptance. She's crying. Thank you. Marcus. Victoria smiled, the first real smile she'd felt in days. Tomorrow, she'd start the work of rebuilding Whitmore Academy. Tomorrow, she'd turn her father's weapon into something beautiful. Tonight, she'd go home to her Brooklyn apartment and delete the dozens of interview requests still flooding her phone. Let the world speculate about Victoria Hayes and James Whitmore. Let them create their own narratives about love and revenge and the price of truth. She knew what was real. The kiss at the plaza had been defiance. The 3 weeks in his penthouse had been discovery. And sitting in this park, holding the tools to heal the world that had broken them both, that was forgiveness. Victoria Hayes walked home through the Brooklyn streets, carrying the weight of an empire and the memory of gray eyes that had learned finally how to see. Behind her, the city hummed with the stories people told themselves about power and love and the space between heroism and destruction. But Victoria had learned something important about stories in the past month. The best ones never really end. They just teach you who you were always meant to be. The end.